What if everything you've been told about freedom is a lie designed to keep you enslaved? What if the very thing you think makes you free, your right to own property, to accumulate wealth, to buy and sell as you please, is actually the mechanism of your deepest oppression? What if the house you're paying for, the car you're financing, the possessions you're protecting are not symbols of your liberation, but the bars of an invisible prison? Karl Marx, the revolutionary thinker whose ideas still terrify the ruling class 150 years after his death, saw through the greatest deception in human history. The illusion that private property creates freedom when it actually destroys it. This isn't about taking away your stuff. This is about revealing why your stuff is taking away your life, your time, your relationships, and your very capacity to be human. Get ready to have your mind exploded. Marx understood something that would shatter every comfortable assumption about modern life. Private property isn't natural, isn't eternal, and isn't the foundation of freedom. It's a recent historical invention that created mass slavery disguised as individual liberty. For most of human history, humans lived in societies where land, resources, and the means of survival belonged to everyone. The idea that someone could own the earth beneath your feet would have seemed as absurd as owning the air you breathe. But here's where it gets revolutionary. Marx didn't just see private property as unfair. He saw it as the source of all human alienation. When everything becomes property, including your own ability to work, you become separated from the natural world, from your own productive capacity, from other people, and ultimately from yourself. You think owning things makes you free, but actually you become owned by your possessions. Look at your own life. How much of your time is spent working to pay for things you already own? How much anxiety comes from protecting what you have? How many relationships are destroyed by disputes over money and possessions? How much of your identity is tied up in what you can afford to buy? Marx saw that private property doesn't liberate human potential. It imprisons it within the narrow logic of accumulation. This isn't sentimentality, it's scientific analysis. Marx demonstrated that private property creates a world where most people must sell their lives hour by hour to a small class of people who own the means of production. You call this having a job, but Marx called it what it really is: wage slavery. You're free to choose which capitalist will buy your time, but you're not free to choose not to sell your time at all. The most perverse aspect of this system is that it makes you grateful for your exploitation. You thank your boss for the opportunity to make them rich. You compete with other workers for the privilege of being exploited. You define your worth by your ability to accumulate property that was stolen from the commons that should belong to everyone. Marx revealed that every piece of private property in existence today is built on a foundation of violence, theft, and murder that has been sanitized by legal systems designed to protect the thieves. What economists call primitive accumulation was actually the largest crime in human history: the systematic theft of common lands, the enslavement of indigenous peoples, the transformation of free peasants into wage laborers who had no choice but to sell themselves to survive. This wasn't ancient history, it's ongoing. Every day, more commons are privatized. More public resources are sold to private owners. More aspects of life are commodified and sold back to you at a profit. The air you breathe is being polluted by private companies who pay nothing for the privilege. The water you drink is being privatized by corporations who claim ownership over rivers and aquifers. The genetic material in your own body is being patented by pharmaceutical companies. But here's the truly revolutionary insight. This system of accumulation doesn't just harm the poor. it destroys the humanity of the rich as well. When you organize your entire life around acquiring and protecting property, you become incapable of genuine relationships, authentic creativity, or meaningful connection with the natural world. The capitalist becomes as alienated as the worker, just in a different way. Marx saw that private property creates a social system based on scarcity, competition, and fear. Even when there's enough for everyone, the system must create artificial scarcity to maintain profitability. Even when cooperation would benefit everyone, the system forces competition. Even when people want to share and help each other, the system makes generosity economically irrational. This is why every problem you care about, climate change, inequality, war, mental illness, social isolation, can be traced back to the logic of private property and capital accumulation. You can't solve these problems within a system that requires them for its own reproduction. Marx's most radical insight was that human beings are fundamentally social creatures whose individuality can only develop through community, cooperation, and shared ownership of the means of life. The rugged individualism celebrated by capitalist ideology is actually a form of social mutilation that prevents you from becoming who you really are. Think about everything you use in a single day. The food you eat was grown by thousands of people you'll never meet. The clothes you wear were made by workers around the world. The technology you use represents the accumulated knowledge of human civilization. The language you think in was created by millions of people over thousands of years. You are not a self-made individual. You are the product of social cooperation on a massive scale. But private property alienates you from this social reality. It makes you feel like you must compete with others rather than cooperate with them. It makes you hoard resources rather than share them. It makes you see other people as threats to your property rather than fellow human beings with whom you could create something beautiful together. Marx envisioned a society where individual freedom and social cooperation wouldn't contradict each other, but would mutually reinforce each other. Instead of freedom from society, you could have freedom through society. Instead of being forced to choose between your own interests and the common good, you could live in a world where your personal development required and enabled everyone else's development. This isn't utopian fantasy, it's practical necessity. The challenges facing humanity today, climate change, technological disruption, global inequality, can only be solved through unprecedented levels of social cooperation. Private property makes such cooperation impossible because it forces people to prioritize short-term private gain over long-term collective survival. Marx understood that capitalism would eventually create the technological and social conditions for its own transcendence. The same forces that make capitalism so destructive also create the possibility of a world beyond property, beyond markets, beyond the wage system. We're living through that transition right now, but most people can't see it because they're still thinking within capitalist assumptions. Consider what technology has made possible. We could eliminate most repetitive labor through automation. We could provide abundance for everyone through renewable energy and sustainable production. We could organize complex social cooperation through digital networks. We could share knowledge and culture freely through the internet. The only thing stopping us is a social system based on private property that requires artificial scarcity to maintain profitability. Marx predicted that capitalism would eventually automate away most jobs, making the wage system obsolete. He predicted that the means of production would become so social in character that private ownership would become obviously absurd. He predicted that workers would become so educated and cooperative that they would demand democratic control over the economy. All of these predictions are coming true, but instead of leading to liberation, they're creating new forms of crisis within the capitalist system. Technological unemployment creates mass suffering in a system where you must work to survive. Social production creates massive profits for private owners, while workers become increasingly precarious. Educated workers become increasingly frustrated with their powerlessness in economic decision-making. The contradiction is becoming unsustainable. Either we move beyond private property toward democratic control of the economy, or civilization will collapse under the weight of its own productivity. There's no middle path. Marx saw that true freedom requires not the abolition of all property, but the expansion of common property. Resources, knowledge, and means of production owned and controlled democratically by the people who use them. This isn't about taking away your personal possessions. It's about transforming the economy from private profit to public good. Imagine a world where housing was a human right, not a commodity. Where healthcare was freely available to all, not rationed by ability to pay. Where education was a lifelong opportunity, not a debt trap. Where transportation was efficient and free, not a source of pollution and inequality. Where technology served human needs, not private accumulation. This isn't impossible. It's happening in fragments all over the world. Open-source software creates better products than proprietary alternatives. Wikipedia provides more comprehensive knowledge than private encyclopedias. Public healthcare systems deliver better outcomes at lower costs than private systems. Cooperative businesses are more resilient and innovative than conventional corporations. Marx understood that these examples point toward a fundamentally different way of organizing society. One based on cooperation rather than competition, abundance rather than scarcity, democratic participation rather than authoritarian hierarchy. The commons aren't primitive, they're the future. But getting there requires confronting the power of those who benefit from the current system. Private property isn't just an economic arrangement. It's a power structure that allows a tiny minority to control the majority through their ownership of the means of survival. They will not give up this power voluntarily. Modern capitalism has created a sophisticated illusion that property ownership equals freedom through the ideology of consumer choice. You think you're free because you can choose between thousands of products. But Marx would ask, who decided what your choices would be? Who controls what gets produced and how? Who benefits from your consumption? Every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. But you're voting in an election where all the candidates were chosen by the same corporate oligarchy. You can choose between Coke and Pepsi, but you can't choose a world without corporate beverage monopolies. You can choose between different brands of cars, but you can't choose public transportation systems that would eliminate the need for private vehicles. This consumer freedom actually makes you less free in every meaningful sense. You must work longer hours to afford things you don't really need. You must go into debt to access basic necessities like housing, healthcare, and education. You must compete with your neighbors and co-workers for access to artificially scarce resources. Marx saw that real freedom would mean having democratic control over production decisions, not just consumption choices. Instead of being forced to choose from whatever products maximize corporate profits, you could participate in collective decisions about what gets produced, how it gets produced, and how the benefits get distributed. This kind of economic democracy is the foundation of all other freedoms. You can't have genuine political democracy when economic power is concentrated in private hands. You can't have meaningful personal freedom when your survival depends on selling yourself to employers. You can't have social equality when property ownership determines your life chances. Marx understood that capitalism is a global system that requires global solutions. Private property doesn't just create inequality within countries. It creates a global system of exploitation where wealthy nations extract resources and labor from poor nations through economic and military force. The same logic that allows some individuals to own the means of production allows some nations to own the world's resources. The same violence that created private property within countries creates imperialism between countries. The same alienation that separates workers from their production separates the global South from its wealth and resources. This is why you can't solve global problems like climate change, poverty, or war without addressing the global system of private property. As long as corporations can profit from pollution, there will be climate change. As long as wealthy nations can extract wealth from poor nations, there will be global inequality. As long as competition for resources drives international relations, there will be war. Marx envisioned a world where international cooperation would replace national competition, where resources would be shared globally according to need, rather than hoarded nationally according to power. This isn't naive idealism. It's practical necessity for human survival in an interconnected world. The alternative is barbarism, a world where climate refugees are met with military force, where pandemics spread because healthcare is rationed by ability to pay, where technological advances benefit only the wealthy while everyone else suffers technological unemployment. Marx never provided a detailed blueprint for how to move beyond private property, but he identified the contradictions within capitalism that would eventually make such a transition inevitable. We're living through those contradictions right now, but the outcome isn't predetermined. It depends on collective human action. The transition begins with recognizing that many forms of commons already exist and work better than private alternatives. Public education, public health care, public transportation, public parks, public libraries, these are all examples of successful common ownership that provides universal access to essential services. But the transition requires more than expanding existing commons. It requires democratizing economic decision-making at every level. Workers controlling their workplaces, communities controlling their resources, nations cooperating on global challenges, humanity collectively stewarding the planet. This doesn't happen through elections or reforms within the existing system. It happens through building alternative institutions that demonstrate the superiority of cooperative organization. It happens through direct action that reclaims common resources from private control. It happens through international solidarity that transcends national boundaries. Most importantly, it happens through changing consciousness, recognizing that private property is not natural or eternal, but a historical institution that can be changed through collective human action. So here's the unthinkable truth that Marx spent his life articulating. Everything you've been taught about property and freedom is backwards. Private property doesn't create freedom. It destroys freedom by separating you from the social cooperation that makes human life possible. Individual ownership doesn't liberate human potential. It imprisons human potential within the narrow logic of accumulation and competition. But recognizing this isn't cause for despair, it's cause for hope. If private property is a human creation, it can be transformed through human action. If the current system is destroying human possibilities, we can create systems that enhance human possibilities. If capitalism is incompatible with human survival, we can build an economy compatible with both human flourishing and ecological sustainability. This doesn't mean taking away your personal possessions or forcing you to live in some gray communist dystopia. It means creating a world where everyone has access to everything they need to develop their full human potential. It means democratizing economic power so that production serves human needs rather than private profits. It means organizing society around cooperation and care rather than competition and exploitation. The choice before humanity is stark. Evolve beyond private property toward democratic control of the economy, or face civilizational collapse as the contradictions of capitalism tear apart the social and ecological foundations of human life. There is no neutral ground, no middle path, no way to reform capitalism into something humane and sustainable. Marx showed us that this choice is not just political or economic. It's about what kind of species we want to be. Do we want to be isolated individuals competing for artificially scarce resources? Or do we want to be social beings cooperating to create abundance for everyone? Do we want to be masters and slaves? Or do we want to be free human beings developing our capacities together? The technology exists. The resources exist. The knowledge exists. The only thing missing is the collective will to move beyond a system that enriches the few at the expense of the many. That will can only emerge through understanding that another world is not just possible, it's necessary for human survival. Marx didn't just critique capitalism. He revealed the revolutionary potential that lies dormant in every human being who has ever felt alienated by a system that treats people as things and things as more important than people. That revolutionary potential is in you. The question is, what will you do with it? The future is watching. The earth is waiting. Your ancestors are calling. Choose wisely. Everything depends on it.